Wow, has this ever been an intense 2 years? If you're feeling a bit tired, it's no wonder. Each of our brains has been going into overdrive as we've tried to navigate what's happening, what's coming next, and how am I personally supposed to respond to all this? On top of all of that, we've had to learn a new vocabulary. A whole bunch of words and phrases that literally didn't exist before March 2020 became part of our everyday lexicon. There are way too many to name, but here are a few of my favorites. CORONAGEDDON, when the upheaval and disruption seems otherworldly and overwhelming. A CORONACOASTER, when you're in a wild ride of navigating the ups and downs and you're beginning to feel a little sick. QUARANTINI, a drink cocktail you mix at home while you're isolating in lockdown. DOOMSCROLLIng, the hypnotic state of endlessly reading grim internet headlines and social media feeds. ANTIBUDDIES, a play on antibodies. Antibodies are two friends who have both tested positive with corona antibodies are therefore allowed to hang out together. CORONACATION, when an employee was paid to not go to work and forced to stay home. And then this last couple of weeks, I've been thinking a lot about two more. The Great Resignation. People quitting their jobs at unprecedented rates. In the United States, that equated to more than 47 million people this last year alone. And a word I first heard in the news this last week. Shrinkflation, when companies shrink the packaging and the amount of product, but charge the same as they did when they offered the larger version. Often the packaging will remain the same size, but as seen in this Cadbury example, they reduce the amount of chocolate by 8% with a new shape, and literally by cutting the corners, but the price remained the same. Well, it's these last two that have me thinking about our church. The series we're wrapping up today called Tabula Rasa and the book of Nehemiah. 3 weeks ago, we launched a series we called Tabula Rasa. Tabula Rasa is a Latin phrase that literally means a scraping of the slate or a cleaning of the tablet. In other words, a fresh start. Together, we've explored an intense need that we all have for a fresh start after this pandemic, both in our personal lives and for our church. And while we've discovered a number of transferable principles, I've been very clear about the primary focus of this series, which is to refresh, rebuild, and relaunch our church's mission, impact, and functionality. However, it's my observation that these two economic and marketplace concepts, the Great Resignation and Shrinkflation, aren't just at play out there in the world, but have in so many ways seeped into our souls and are shaping our attitudes and actions. The Great Resignation isn't just something that happens on Bay Street or Wall Street or in the big corporations. It's something that is happening in churches across North America and has most certainly found its way into our hearts and minds here at Riverwood. Shrinkflation isn't just something happening in manufacturing facilities and appearing in grocery aisles. I'm watching shrinkflation happening in people's hearts and right here in our own church. The pandemic shook and agitated all of us and caused people to ask some big questions. Questions like, what am I doing here? What do I really want out of life? Why am I even working or serving or attending here? Am I making a difference or just putting in time? Is this what I want my life to be defined by? Last year, 47 million Americans answered no and resigned from their jobs. Stats show that proportionally, it was nearly the same shocking and unprecedented rate in Canada. But those questions and that sentiment weren't limited to the workplace. Like no other time in our church history, people resigned and simply quit coming to church. At first, they were fairly faithful to participate at home on one of our 5 online platforms. But when that started to get old, they quietly resigned from that connection and worship as well. And I get it. There's something almost intoxicating with the idea of breaking free from both our jobs and, if we're honest, our church, biblical doctrine and faith. Who wouldn't like a few more hours in our week to do whatever we want? Who wouldn't want to uncouple from the responsibility and accountability and the weightiness of the mission? Who wouldn't want to resign and walk away from the commitments, obligations, duties, and the burden of responsibility that comes with being part of the body of Christ? So literally, hundreds and hundreds of people did just that. And of those who remain, it was hard for us not to be swept into this idea of shrinkflation, cutting back on our giving and serving and what we contribute, but advertising it as full commitment. Now, you need to know that these dynamics playing themselves out in our church, they don't frustrate me or make me angry or annoy me in the least. I happen to believe that the Church of Jesus Christ needs a good shaking to see what falls off and what sticks every generation or two. I'm not upset or discouraged by what I see, a little saddened at times, But mostly, if anything, I'm kind of fired up. I'm excited to see what God's going to do next with a people who aren't easily shaken, distracted, or enticed away. I love how the writer of the New Testament book of Hebrews puts it. He's just finished quoting from the book of Haggai and talking about how God is a God who shakes things up. He wants to see what sticks. So at Mount Sinai, God spoke and the earth shook. And the writer of Hebrews says, at the final judgment, God will speak and both heaven and earth will be shaken. But then he says this in Hebrews 12:28. Therefore, let us all be thankful that we are part of an unshakable kingdom and offer to God worship that pleases him and reflects the awe and reverence we have towards him. We are part of an unshakable kingdom, a people that worship an unshakable God. And that's why we worship and serve and live our lives to reflect that awe and reverence. However, that doesn't mean that we're immune to shaking or destruction or some jarring experiences on this side of heaven. And one of the many examples of this in the Bible is found in the book of Nehemiah. In a devastating and unbelievable shaking moment, God's people were attacked and taken captive, exiled to Babylon in about 600 BC. The Persians conquered the Babylonians, and eventually the Jewish people were allowed to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. What Israel had experienced during these decades were akin to what we are seeing played out in the nightly news as Russia invades and destroys Ukraine. It was unfathomable, inhumane, and horrific. However, God stirred Nehemiah's heart with a sense that this was a tabula rasa moment, a rare and profound opportunity for a fresh start. So when Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, we see Nehemiah do exactly what we've said is necessary for any tabula rasa fresh start experience. Number one, assess what's broken and not working. Listen to a passage out of Nehemiah's journal from around the year 445 BC. I slipped out during the night. I had not told anyone about the plans that God put in my heart for Jerusalem. After dark, I went out through the valley gate, past the jackal's well, and over to the dung gate to inspect the broken walls and burnt gates. Though it was still dark, I went up to the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and entered again to the valley gate. If you're going to stage an assault on chaos and brokenness, dysfunction, hurt, pain, or any form of flaw or failure, you're going to need to assess what's broken and not working in very, very honest terms. But it's not enough to just know it. You need to, number two, use your words to speak it out loud. Nehemiah continues writing in his journal, and he tells us what he said to the priests, the leaders, and the officials in Jerusalem. Picking up in verse 17, but now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. But Nehemiah didn't stop there. It wasn't enough to know it in his head what needed to change. It wasn't enough to declare it out loud with his words what wasn't working and what needed to be restored. Nehemiah, number three, enlisted help. Nehemiah had left the leaders and the people of Jerusalem with a clear and decisive choice, and he asked for their commitment to this fresh start. In verse 18 we read, they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. If you have a stirring in your heart that your family is becoming disjointed and needs rebuilding, or you have a sense that you're not living up to your full potential at work, or if you know you haven't been living your life with purpose and intentionality, or if you know you haven't treated your body well and you've been neglecting to take care of it, or you never want to talk about the dismal condition of your finances, your storage spaces at home, or your marriage, and yet you know that God is stirring your heart and a longing for a tabula rasa, a fresh start, Nehemiah's life and journal is a perfect step-by-step guide to making it happen. Number one, assess what's broken and not working. Number two, use your words to speak it out loud. And number three, enlist help. Help for you might be a doctor, a counselor, maybe a therapist. Reach out, get their commitment to help you and provide what you will never be able to provide yourself. Help for you might be Jordan and our twice-a-week faith and fitness class that is just launching, or some other fitness program. Help for you might be your spouse, a trusted friend, a small group leader, a recovery program, a book, a resource, or a pastor. Just know this, very little meaningful change happens when you miss one of these three fresh start steps. Fail to honestly assess and own the problem, and you will lack motivation. Fail to speak it out loud, using your words, and you will lack accountability and endurance. Fail to humble yourself and enlist help, and you will lack the infusion of stuff you didn't know and stuff you couldn't do, and your fresh start is likely to die in the altar of good intentions and wind up as just another failed attempt. God shows us how to launch a fresh start in the real world by recording Nehemiah's strategy. Number 1, assess what's broken and not working. Number 2, use your words to speak it out loud. Number 3, enlist help. Well, in a few minutes, we're going to get brutally practical and apply the step-by-step strategy to rebuilding our church in this season of fresh starts. But before we do, let's join our hearts together to express our awe and reverence of our unshakable God, and let's worship together. I want to take a couple of minutes to introduce you to someone who has experienced so many Tabula Rasa fresh start moments in her life, and is currently experiencing another one as she is the latest addition to our elder team. Here's a little bit of Marie's story.
Hello, my name is Marie Padwell, and I do home care. Well, I take care of people with disability as a manager, and I live in Winnipeg for 14 years now, and I have 3 kids. When I was young, I used to live in Jérémie. It's a small town in Haiti in the south. I went to school in the capital, and I met my husband there. We became boyfriend and girlfriend, but he was a Christian, and he said to me, if you have to be girlfriend and boyfriend, you have to be a Christian. And I said, well, I like that guy, so I don't have a choice. So I became a Christian, and that was the best decision of my life. And from the capital, we get married. I moved to the north with no family, just my husband and I. We decided to have a family there, and we were married for 6-7 years, and he passed away. He had a heart attack. He passed away. I decided, the girls and I, to move to the state. So it's a tabula rasa for me, because it's kind of like it's a new start. We have to move to the state to start a new life. God was the one who directed my path to leave, to move to the state with no family, no friends. And couple years later, I met my second husband. Also, it was God who sent him to me in Michigan, because he was in South Dakota. So we got married, moved now to South Dakota. So from South Dakota, we are living life, and thing wasn't working for me because I need to have papers to work in the state, and it's not that easy to get your residency in the state. And I said, we need to pray. We need to find out where I need to go with my girl so we can leave. Pray. We decided to move to Winnipeg. Again, no family in Winnipeg. So just my husband and I and my 3 girls, we decided we pack our car with some clothes. We just moved to Winnipeg. Each of the steps I made in my life, I can see God there. And by him being there, he helped us adjust in every situation. In every fresh start, there is struggle. But you just need to remember, God is always there for you. God didn't promise you're gonna be all roses. No, he didn't say that. You will struggle. In this life, you will have struggle. You will have tribulation. Life gonna be hard, but take courage, and he will be with me. Every time I lost a husband, so like you said, I lost 2 husbands so far. I always ask the question, sometimes I say to myself, why me? What did I do to deserve that? And then by thinking about those questions, make me connected more to God. Make me seek him more. Living, dying is part of life. He is with Jesus. He is in Jesus' arm, while he is going to always be in my heart. That's how I say it. And we talk about my husband every single day in our house. Even my first husband, the kids, we talk about the dad all the time. Sometimes we said, what will Papa do? What will Papa say? Because that's how we call my second husband, Papa. I said, what will he do? What will he say if something happens? So that's help us, navigate through any situation we are in life. Oh, I love reading my Bible. That is one thing I cannot live without doing. I have to. If I don't, I miss on something. Even church, if I don't come to church, it's like I feel empty, like I feel something is missing, because I don't get connected. I don't get to dig in the words of God. That's what helped me in my everyday life. Do not overthink reading your Bible. Because if you want to live a day-to-day life, if you want to have strength in your life, if you want to have hope for the future, you have to read it. Because that's the only connection you're going to have with God. Every time you read it, there is a new start. There is a fresh, there is a new beginning. Every time you read your Bible. It doesn't matter how long you've been reading it. It doesn't matter if you just started. There's always something new in the Bible for you to learn. It is, like I said, it is a new start. It's a new beginning. Who doesn't like a new start and a new beginning? It is so good when God gives you a second chance. So I will encourage each one of you, pick up your Bible and read.
On Monday morning, every one of us has an opportunity to engage a fresh start moment as we launch Chapter a Day version 2.0, A Year with Jesus. The challenge is simple. Set aside 15 to 20 minutes every weekday to read one chapter from the New Testament and pray. We're going to be starting in Matthew chapter 1 this Monday, May 16th, and wrapping up with Revelation chapter 22 exactly 1 year from today. To show you that I never ask you to do something that I'm not committed to myself, I'll be blogging fresh insights on every chapter every day and posting them by 5 a.m. And here's the deal. Although partway through this year it's going to get a little difficult depending on what book we're reading, God always uses His Word to bring life and truth into our lives. It's one of the great ironies of our faith that there are so many people who identify as Christ followers who have never or haven't recently read His words so that they can know what they're actually following. Let's not be those people. Go to the Riverwood app or Riverwood website and be sure to hit the I'm in button before Monday morning, and let's do this as an entire church together. Now, what we're going to do in the next few minutes may not sound like a sermon or a biblical message, but that's just because we've been conditioned to think that it's biblical if it's spiritual sounding, and it's not biblical or of God if it's practical or logistically sounding, and yet that is such a falsehood. In fact, what we see in Scripture is that God routinely takes the practical, the logistical, the operational, and the procedural and makes them spiritual. In the book of Genesis, God laid out the blueprints for Noah and all the building plans for a supersized boat, and God used the wood and the pitch and the construction to send a message of grace and rescue. In the book of Exodus, God gave incredibly detailed instructions on how to build a place of worship, right down to the gold utensils and the ornamental lampstands. And God used the gold and wood and fabric and silver, the carpenters, the artisans, and the seamstresses to send a message about His accessibility and how close He is to His people. In the book of Joshua, God gave instructions to the people about collecting stones and just how to stack them to make a memorial. And God used the stones and the design and the sweat and muscle power of the workers to send a message of His faithfulness to keep His promises. We could go through every book of the Bible and line up the material objects that God used. Jars and wine and stones and sticks and fabric and canvas and doors and walls and windows and baskets and dirt and mud and oxes and mules and fish and coins and trees and fruit and sheep and fences and farming tools and nails and thorns and rooftops and crowns and robes and ships and fishing nets. All of them became tools in God's hands, and God used these everyday items to accomplish His purposes. In the case of Nehemiah, God wasn't just at work in the worship services and the teaching of the Word. God was as much at work in the rebuilding of the walls, and God leveraged the cement and stones and mortar and trowels, the levels and hammers, the stonemason, builders, surveyors, and carpenters to accomplish His purposes. So you need to realize what we're about to do, while being extremely practical, is also at the same time highly spiritual. But let's follow the same steps Nehemiah took. Number 1, assess what's broken and not working. This past week, I secretly took a walk around Riverwood and simply recorded what is broken or not working. Now, you may or may not realize that Riverwood has one of the most unique church models in North America. I know of only one other church, the one that God used to inspire us, located in San Diego, that is structured like we are. Multi-site church growth conferences tell you that you should never plant a church site within 20 to 30 minutes drive of your original site. It just won't work. Well, we broke all the rules with 6 buildings and 7 worship communities within a 20-second drive of each other. Why? Because it keeps us in the community that God has called us to, and it keeps our worship communities small, which increases our connectivity with people. However, owning 6 buildings comes with some significant challenges. Where a church would typically need one audio tech and one lighting tech and one e-visuals tech for a weekend, every weekend we need 3 audio techs, 3 lighting techs, and 3 visual techs. Where a normal church needs 1 kids team and 1 worship team each weekend, we need 3 kids teams and 3 worship teams every weekend. Where a conventional church would need 1 coffee and greeting and welcome center and usher and safety team each week, we need 3 of each of these just to open our doors. So here's some stuff that is literally broken and not working. We don't have enough audio techs. There are a few people that have been serving every weekend, and they're nearing burnout. We are in a desperate need of audio, e-visuals, lighting, camera, and broadcast techs. With COVID, everything became remarkably complex, and we had to learn new skills and essentially become a TV production company along with running 3 live venues. This is something that is currently broken and needs rebuilding. Our warehouse welcome center has simply been closed and isn't welcoming or serving anyone because we don't have a leader and we don't have people who have stepped in to help. An honest assessment also reveals that our in-office reception services have broken. Our receptionists switched jobs, and we're struggling just to answer the phones and the door intercom. While our Riverwood Kids program is functional, we find ourselves in a place with too few people are doing too much work. And with people coming back to church, Riverwood Kids is in need of some fresh talent and energy to come join the team. The truth is, every area of the church needs help during this rebuilding phase after COVID. From prayer teams to meals ministry, small group leaders, divorce care leaders, musicians, technicians, builders and maintenance, greeters, cooks for our community program, mentors and childcare for our at-risk moms program, and people to work with our community kids. Nehemiah walked around and assessed what was broken and not working, and then he, number 2, used his words to speak it out loud. We've been without a facilities director for about 10 months, so everything I'm about to name as broken or not working is either falling on Pastor John or myself, and we simply can't continue to shoulder this stuff alone. But here's our equivalency to Nehemiah's broken down walls. The fire hall chain link fence needs to come down as it's derelict, broken, and separating us from the community that we're here to serve. The insulation and drywall needs to go up in the video studio. The flooring needs to go down in the video studio. And the cafe from the fire hall needs to be moved over to the warehouse, and we need to reconfigure, wire, plumb, and make it operational. We have a Riverwood Kids washroom that is roughed in, but just a piece of plywood covering the space, and this washroom needs to be built and made functional. With the fire hall pipe burst disaster and the reno project we're doing, turning the fire hall into our food bank and community kitchen, the entire Riverwood Kids space in the basement needs to be cleaned and made usable again. The exterior windows and door trims in the fire hall need to be scraped and painted before opening day. And someone keeps stealing our metal rock signs, so they need to be redesigned to resist vandalism and brought back to functionality. We have a C-can that desperately needs organizing. We have a garage door that needs fixing. We have attic space roof exhaust fans that need to be replaced. And we have spaces that need a designer's touch. We need an interior designer or 2 to turn our fireplace areas from bland and boring to warm and wow. We need an interior designer or 2 to maximize our foyer and gathering spaces and help people feel remarkably welcome and at home at Riverwood. We need a landscape designer to give direction to turning some of our outdoor spaces into inviting and relationally functional spaces. We have drywall that needs repairing, sound baffles that need mounting, baseboards that need installing, broken curbs that need fixing, shrub and flower beds that need planting, and doors that need painting. Church, 20 years ago, a group of about 150 people worked on rotating building crews, 5 crews a week, for 10 months to turn our first building, the old door factory, into a place where people could come and gather to discover and worship God. Those people literally sold boats, RVs, a cabin, cashed in their RSPs, emptied vacation savings accounts to make it happen. That story was repeated when we purchased a 1906 fire hall and a warehouse at the same time and renovated them, turning them into more spaces for people to explore faith, hear a message of hope, build a meaningful friendship, and come to know Jesus. Those people gave and worked sacrificially, often for months at a time. And for the past 20 years, without even really thinking about it or what it cost them, we've walked into these buildings each week. But these buildings didn't just happen. Someone had to run the wires. Someone had to stuff the insulation. Someone else had to install the vapor barrier, the drywall, the lights, the HVAC units, the carpet and flooring, and the doors, and they did all that because they were fueled by a calling and a vision. And this is where we come to Nehemiah's third step. Number 3, enlist help. Church, I've assessed what's broken and not working. I've used my words to speak it out loud, and now I need to ask you for your help. If you've been here even a short while, you know our little motto, everyone serve, everyone give. I'm going to ask, as part of Riverwood's Tabula Rasa, our fresh start, that every one of us would in the next 6 weeks find a place to serve and find a way to give. We're not panicking, but we're running about $25,000 to $40,000 behind in our giving. Now, we're not panicked because we have some reserves, and we get it. Life is uncertain. The economy is difficult. Everything is getting more expensive, and I am not about to guilt anyone into giving. However, if you have the means and the heart, but haven't been in the habit of giving, your heart for giving has experienced some shrinkflation, I want to invite you to test drive the giving discipline just for the next 6 weeks. Pray about it. Ask God what you should give. Then trust Him and allow Him to stretch your faith. And I want to invite every one of us to find a way to serve. Let's turn the Great Resignation into the Great Mobilization. Let's turn the shrinkflation that we're all tempted to exercise into a season of jubilation and reformation for our church. So here's what I'm suggesting. We each take our corner of Nehemiah's broken wall, and we each own it and build for 6 weeks. On June 30th, we'll wrap up this push and coast a bit into a great summer. Our strategy for solving the building issues will be to run 7 Thursday evening building crews. Come to one or more if you're able. Additionally, we have a list of building needs that individuals or small groups could just own and accomplish on their own time. To be clear, I'm asking every Riverwooder who isn't in the habit of giving to give for the next 6 weeks and stretch your giving muscle. And I'm asking every Riverwooder who isn't currently serving to serve at least once in the next 6 weeks, or maybe even a few more times. Now, in our in-person worship services, ushers are handing out a page of overwhelming needs. For those joining us online, if you go to the Riverwood app or the Riverwood website, you'll see a tab that says the Great Mobilization. When you click on it, you will see literally 101 serving opportunities. Each one is numbered, and here's my question to you. Which number has your name on it? If you were to push yourself a bit, sacrifice a little bit more, dig a little deeper, which problem could you solve and which broken thing could you fix? On that list, you'll find weekend serving needs, during the week serving needs that you can solve from home, and a very extensive list of building and facility needs. You'll also find our whole church get out into the community, serve our community, Trash the Neighborhood Day, Saturday, June the 11th. Now, as much as some of you are ready for a high-octane challenge and a call to arms, I need to acknowledge that some of us are simply too overwhelmed, too exhausted, too wounded, and hurting too much. And you need to know, if you're in that place, we're not trying to squeeze more out of you or load you up with more to do. For you, this might not be the season of giving and serving, but rather a season of rest and healing, and we cheer you on towards becoming healthy again. Now, before we leave Nehemiah, I want to show you something I find so very inspirational. Nehemiah spends chapter 3 listing all the individuals by name who stepped up and took on a job. Eliashib the priest built the sheep's gate. The sons of Hassenah built what was called the fish gate in the wall. Joiada and Meshullam laid the beams and set up the doors and installed the bolts in the bars. Shalem and his daughters repaired the section next to the Tower of Ovens. This chapter lists more than 50 people by name, with large and small groups of people that weren't named, everyone exercising extreme ownership. Then in chapter 4, we read this verse. The builders and their helpers had their tools in one hand and a sword in the other. The picture we see emerging is of a people who experienced devastating loss and the destruction of their way of worship. However, these weren't mere attenders, and they weren't even volunteers. They were owners. They took the condition of the city, the walls, the temple as their problem to solve because they owned it, rebuilding with one hand and protecting the community with the other. And the success they experienced was the result of God's faithfulness to His promises and their faithfulness to their calling. So I want to invite you to own your church, broken stuff and all. I want to invite you to join our staff as we lead the way, starting tomorrow morning, reading a chapter a day. I want to invite you to find a need on the list of 101 broken things, and in the next 6 weeks, help solve it. If you've never actually owned your church by resourcing it, I invite you to give, maybe for the first time, and join the investment we're making together. And let's turn the Great Resignation into the Great Mobilization as part of our worship in reverence and awe.